So if you're wondering just how important it is to prepare for failure stories in behavioral interviews, I will tell you this. I don't know anyone who got hired for a senior role that went through a behavioral interview without preparing for failure stories. So in today's video, I'm going to give you some hopefully interesting pointers when it comes to brainstorming for your own high quality failure stories. And the way I'm going to do this, I'm going to present you with 6 areas or where you would want to eventually look for the best failures to present in a job interview. And the first one would be, tell me about a time when you failed to deliver something significant on time. So a time-bound failure. And if you're prepping for an Amazon interview, this would be in the context of deliver results as a principle. So there are some extremes here, however. If you just got fired because you couldn't complete your job on time and it was all your fault, maybe you'd want to skip on this example. Or on the other extreme, if you had some internal deadline, part of some other super complex project, and the deadline was set by you, in other words, it had no consequence if you missed it, then it's probably not a good enough of an example. So try to think of an example that makes sense and had some consequences, ideally. The second question to test, to brainstorm for such failure story would be, tell me about the time when you failed to meet your client's expectations. And this would be within a customer obsession context if you're prepping for an Amazon interview. This negative experience with customers could be revealing of failures. And of course, you should be careful not to disqualify yourself from the job, but keep in mind that the more significant your failure is, also the better the opportunity that you will convince them that you are the type of person who can learn, who can grow from these failures. So number 3 here, tell me about a significant mistake that you've made. So this is more like to test your thought process, your ability to take decisions and to analyze situations. And it's impossible we don't make mistakes, actually. The challenge here would be to find a significant enough mistake that would make sense in a failure context. And I found this to be quite efficient at times. The next area where you would want to look for failures is within a goal setting context. So a goal that you failed to achieve. And this doesn't necessarily have to be within a time-bound context, although it could be, of course, but the idea is that you put this in a goal. So you had a goal and you failed to achieve that goal. Maybe you tried it repeatedly, maybe you failed on it a couple of times, and eventually you just simply failed to achieve it. So this would be again the context of deliver results as a leadership principle. The 5th here would be, tell me about a decision that you regret. So we all make bad decisions, that's just normal. So can you find a decision that was significant enough to qualify as a failure in your professional, in a professional context? If so, you could have a proper failure story for this. So decision making is something that employers are very interesting to screen you on in job interviews, and this is very revealing on the way you think, and if you're someone that thinks clearly enough to fit into that type of role that you're applying for. And finally, tell me about the time when you took a risk unsuccessfully. So taking risk is something we do most of the time, and this question could be also maybe linked with the bias for action leadership principle. Like, for example, when you had a fast-paced project in which you took a risk and failed eventually. So again, this is within to help you to brainstorm on whether you can find a time when you took risk, and don't tell me you'd never take risk, because that's impossible, also within a work context. And see if you could frame it properly within a failure context. Of course, the more recent, the better it is, with the condition, of course, not to disqualify you unintentionally for the role. Now, some final thoughts here would be, in my opinion, interviewers are looking for 2 main things while hearing a failure answer. The first one is the quality of the failure. In other words, it should be a proper failure. Second thing, what you learn from it. And this is why I recommend people to spend 50% of the time they answers a failure for the learnings, simply because these learnings are important. And of course, you should frame it within a star format. They should go without saying. The R, the results being the learnings, and the situation and task going hand in hand. This would be how you structure it. Now, how do you know it's a good failure story? It's a properly communicated, at least, failure story. Although, because in many cases it might sound like it's a good one, but the way you communicate it is a bad one. The way you know this is a good or bad one easily is to test it whether if it's quantifiable. What was the consequences? What would have happened if nothing happened here, right? So is this a proper failure, in other words? I found it like the most commonly accepted way to test for failure stories is what was the consequence, how bad it was. For example, if you had a startup that failed, the consequence was obvious. But there are many times where people have challenges in quantifying their failures, and this is why where it could be a question mark when it comes to the quality of your story. So last but not least, for senior roles, I would even encourage you to have 3 to 5 failure stories for the on-site interview, simply because of the importance of this topic. And as I previously mentioned, they are being tested within many contexts. So it's not only one trait that they are testing for when looking for a failure story. There could be many, as I just presented. So this is why I hopefully convinced you that it's an interesting exercise to brainstorm for such failure stories. So there you go. I hope you find this information useful, and thank you very much for watching.